let's get started into lesson 2. So now that you have a better understanding of the planning process, the project development process, and where ACE fits into that, let's get a little bit more detailed into the ACE process itself. So the history of ACE process started with the Federal Authorization of Safety Law, which was signed into law in 2005. Embedded within that legislation was an emphasis on streamlining project delivery, linking planning and NEPA, re-emphasizing collaboration in an integrated planning process, as well as a greater focus on agency collaboration, both public and agency-informed public decision-making. At the same time, we were seeing more and more corridors more and more projects where we needed to look at multiple corridors, which highlighted the need for a new process. So in 2010, FDOT formalized their corridor analysis process, or CAP. So the corridor analysis process captured results of planning activities to help refine the NEPA study scope of work. This included early analysis to narrow the range of reasonable alternative corridors that could enter into the PD&E or NEPA phase. CAP was integrated into the ETDM process because it already included consistent reporting structure, already agreed upon timeframes, and accepted practices to link planning and NEPA. So CAP was established to document stakeholder input, both agency and public involvement, as well as early project decision-making, and help to reduce delays. In 2012, the CAP process was rebranded as the ACE process. The process essentially stayed the same. The change of name provided a distinction between other process names. In 2016, Florida entered the NEPA Assignment Memorandum of Understanding with the Federal Highway Administration. So the process was updated to reflect the federal decision-making responsibilities assumed by the FDOT Office of Environmental Management. Next slide. The primary objective of the ACE process is to develop and evaluate a range of alternative corridors and document those corridors that are recommended for elimination. The ACE process can be used to refine the purpose and need, define the project area, general travel modes, or corridors, even confirming logical termini, describe the general environmental setting, which includes preliminary environmental impacts as well as potential mitigation strategies. The ACE process links planning and NEPA. However, adoption and use of ACE decisions in NEPA is subject to a determination by the lead agency. ACE is performed as part of the ETDM screening effort. Now, whether that's done in planning or programming is a function of where you are in the project development. The decision on whether the project should go through an ACE study should be conducted in coordination with the lead agency. Next slide. So when should you conduct an ACE study? So districts usually should use an ACE process when you think you're going to be looking at a number of corridors. This is typically associated with environmental impact statements and some environmental assessments. Districts may choose to use this process on non-federal projects for complex SEERs, and maybe some local projects completed as peers could benefit from the process as well. By the same token, ACE is likely not needed when the number of alternative corridors is limited or the anticipated impacts are minor in nature. So this slide summarizes the types of projects that might qualify for an ACE. So new alignments or extensions, linking major facilities, extension or connection to an interstate or state routes. So think of a study that would support a program like I-4. Other project types may include major realignments or bypasses. And if you're really not sure, just reach out to OEM and get some feedback. Other modes may benefit from the ACE process as well, whether that's freight, bike, or rail. Generally, local agencies and the FDOT Strategic Intermodal System, or SIS plans, identify corridor improvement needs. When identifying the need for an ACE study, the first step would be to determine if the project involves a corridor on a qualifying project. So for some examples that we said before, a new alignment, a major realignment, or a major bypass. The next step would be to conduct a preliminary assessment. Is there a potential for multiple corridors on this study? So for example, do you have a highly urbanized areas with very limited opportunities for corridors? The ACE process may not be beneficial. Or is it the other way around? You have a large suburban or rural area with a lot of opportunities for potential corridors. There it might be beneficial. Next, you would evaluate project characteristics. Are there known and sensitive resources that you really want to try to avoid. Does the project have the potential to result in controversy? So based on that analysis, the planning organization or the district determines in consultation with the lead agency whether ACE is the right process moving forward. So this graphic, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the different boxes, but Chris and the rest of the lesson will go into a little bit more detail on each step. So starting at the top, the ACE process begins with early identification of initial corridors or defining the study area. In the next step, shown in the dark blue box, the ETDM screening event is conducted. Remember, whether that's planning or programming is a function of where you are in project development at the time and what information has been done, maybe as past planning efforts. Subsequently, in the white box, the study team develops a methodology memorandum. This is used to inform agencies and really all stakeholders on the proposed approach to analyze and document the decisions regarding the alternative corridors. The next two boxes in orange, the methodology memorandum is reviewed by the lead agency and the ETAT and subsequently approved by the lead agencies. In the next two white boxes, the study team applies the methodology and documents the results in the ACER, or the ACE report. In the orange box, there's another round of reviews by both lead agencies and ETAT, and finally, in the last steps, it's approved. Note that the public involvement process is on the right side, and there's 3 key milestones in the environmental screening tool for that input. But keep in mind, public engagement is so critical, and these should not be the only 3 steps that you're having. It is anticipated that each project will have its individual public engagement activities, whether that's kickoff meetings, some sort of advisory group, or a quarter workshop at the end to present the decisions that were made. Next slide. So the overall ACE process involves 3 main steps: initial analysis, conducting the ACE study, and documenting the results. And there's 3 options or scenarios that you might find yourself in, depending on where you are in the particular project. So in scenario 1, you're really just getting started. You don't have a lot of information available. And you might start the ACE process by defining the study area, identifying some initial corridors, and refining those corridors at the end as part of the documentation step. In scenario 2, you have some existing information. You may or may not have preliminary corridors. This scenario allows you to build on any information that you've done prior to past planning efforts. Scenario 3, you have the most information available. You might have already conducted a feasibility study and initially looked at corridors from an engineering and environmental perspective. So in this scenario, you're doing the same thing. Basically, you're working on building on the work that's been done to date. So let's walk through an example of scenario 1. In this case, the ACE study can be used to identify and refine the study area. So the district can choose to use this approach to work with agency partners to identify areas to avoid. At the end of the ACE study, while you might not have initial corridors, the study area is refined based on that interaction and feedback with ETAT. And then at the end, this upfront work might help avoid potential dispute resolutions in the future. During our research, we saw examples where scenario 3 was used, where these corridors had a feasibility study that had been performed and some level of analysis already conducted from an environmental and engineering perspective. So at the end of the ACE process in scenario 3, those projects went on to refine the alternatives and eliminate corridors moving forward into full NEPA. So now Chris will walk you through some additional details on that initial graphic that I mentioned.
Thank you, Sylvia. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to finish the rest of this lesson. So on the right side of your screen is the ACE process graphic that Sylvia talked about. I'm going to briefly walk you through each of these activities. Just keep in mind that this is an overview, and next Wednesday we'll present part 2 of this webinar series, which will dive into the details on how to conduct an ACE study. As Sylvia pointed out in the previous slide about the project progression in the ACE process, you start with either a study area or corridors. This could involve some initial analysis, or it could be based on previous planning efforts. A starting point could be a master plan, a long-range transportation plan, and some projects may have a more detailed analysis from a planning study. Aside from the previous efforts, there are 2 main factors to consider when defining the study area or identifying corridors. One is the sensitive environmental resources, and the second is the purpose and need. You would conduct a GIS analysis to begin identifying the environmental resources in the area. It could be a church, maybe a park, or perhaps there's historical resources. The environmental resource mapping is used to refine the study area and identify corridor paths, where you can place a corridor that avoids or minimizes impacts to resources, whether that's human or the natural environment. It's important to check the ability to meet the purpose and need. Typically, the purpose and need for projects that require an ACE study is to improve traffic congestion and create a new system linkage. It's common to develop future traffic projections and test corridors' ability to meet the purpose and need. Bottom line is that if a corridor does not meet purpose and need, then it shouldn't be considered for further analysis in the ACE study. Okay, so now that you have your corridors identified or you have a defined study area, the next step is to screen them. For this overview presentation, just know that the ACE process occurs within the ETDM screening event, whether a planning screen or a programming screen, as Ted was talking about earlier. It starts with a standard ETDM screening. Afterwards, 2 ACE deliverables are reviewed in the ETDM environmental screening tool. And then the ETDM screening event is finalized after the ACE study is approved. The 2 ACE deliverables that are reviewed in the ETDM environmental screening tool are 1, the methodology memorandum, and 2, the alternative corridor evaluation report, which we'll discuss in the next few slides. To get the project ready for the screening, the initially identified corridors or study area will be digitized in the environmental screening tool, and a description of the project will be created, which includes the purpose and need and a preliminary environmental discussion. When the project is ready, you would submit to the lead agency who performs a pre-screening of the project. Then the project is reviewed by the Environmental Technical Advisory Team, or the ETAT. As Ted mentioned earlier, but just to reiterate, the ETAT is composed of federal, state, and local agencies. For instance, Army Corps, Fish and Wildlife, Coast Guard, could be a water district. Feedback from the agencies is documented in a preliminary screening summary report. Now, there are some slight variations in the ACE process depending on whether a planning screen or an ETDM programming screen is to be conducted. The details are included in the ETDM manual, Chapter 3 for the planning screen and Chapter 4 for the programming screen. We've also included 2 handouts which shows the ACE process in each of these screenings. As well, this will be covered in more detail in next week's webinar. So once you have an ETDM preliminary screening summary report, now it's time to proceed to the next step, which is to develop the methodology memorandum. Keep in mind that the ETDM preliminary screening report will provide feedback from the agencies on the sensitive environmental resources in the study area and potential impacts from the corridors. The methodology memorandum describes the goals of the ACE study and details the data and procedure that will be used to develop, evaluate, and screen alternative corridors or refine the study area. This is similar to a traffic methodology where all parties are agreeing on the approach to the study before it begins. In this case, the parties are typically the district, OEM, who acts as the lead agency for federal projects, and the ETAT. The most common goals for conducting an ACE study is to eliminate corridors and identify corridors moving into the PD&E phase. But it can also be used to identify new corridors or refine the study area. It's critical to carefully select the analysis approach that seems to make sense for the project. This could be based on available data, known critical issues, feedback from the ETAT or other stakeholders, and the district's own knowledge of the area. The approach should describe the specific data used, such as GIS layers and analysis technique. The evaluation is similar to a PD&E study, but less detailed and at a conceptual stage. So the ACE study is essentially used to evaluate the purpose and need, potential environmental impacts, engineering factors such as construction costs and utility impacts, and public and stakeholder input. The methodology memorandum must detail the criteria to eliminate corridors and what decisions are to be made, such as new corridors. Once the methodology memorandum is prepared, it's provided to the lead agency for their first review. Subsequently, it is uploaded to the ETDM environmental screening tool for input from the ETAT and the public. And once all comments have been resolved, the methodology memorandum is ready for approval by the lead agency. Once the lead agency approves a methodology, this is where the fun begins. This is where you apply the process from the methodology to evaluate. This is where the most effort will be expended for the study. The evaluations are going to be based on the initial data, criteria that's been established in the agreed upon methodology memorandum, including ETAT commentary, stakeholder input, and initial analysis. That'll be your starting point. One of the early steps at this stage when applying the methodology and evaluating is to refine corridors to avoid or minimize potential environmental impacts and to identify new corridors. Then the refined corridors or study area are evaluated against that criteria that's been established in the methodology. Does a corridor meet purpose and need? Does it connect communities? Does it alleviate traffic in a town center? What are the potential environmental impacts? Does the corridor have a disproportionately high impact to wetlands? What's the preliminary construction costs? How many bridge crossings are needed? Has feedback from the public been favorable for some corridors but unfavorable for others? And what are agencies saying? Keep in mind that if a corridor does not meet purpose and need, then you can eliminate before proceeding to the other analysis topics. As well, you can eliminate corridors for not meeting the thresholds established in the methodology memorandum. For instance, it has a disproportionately high impact to environmental resources, unfavorable public support, or it's just not feasible from a cost perspective. That's why your methodology is critical to help eliminate corridors. Now, it is possible that you'll conduct the analysis and find that the results are not making sense and you need to deviate from the methodology. Any changes for the methodology must be consulted with the lead agency, and this may require a revised methodology memorandum that is rescreened. At the end of the analysis, you'll have the refined study area or corridors that you'll take to the next step of the project, which could be the PD&E phase. Now it's time to take all of the data and results from the analysis and wrap it up in an alternative corridor evaluation report, or ACER. The ACER documents the alternatives that are eliminated or carried forward to the PD&E study or next phase of the project. Depending on the goal, it could also be used to document the newly identified corridors or the refined study area. When developing the ACER, it's good practice to reach out to OEM to get the latest sample of ACERs from other projects. There's also an ACER template on the OEM website on the screen and available as a handout in the GoToWebinar application. Since the results and decisions from the ACER may be adopted into the PD&E phase, documentation is critical. I know I'm sounding kind of like a broken record here, but it is critical. So what you analyzed, how you analyzed, what corridors were eliminated and why, what corridors are moving forward. Are there any unresolved project issues with the stakeholders, agencies, the public, and how will those unresolved issues be addressed in future phases? Always keep in mind that the evaluation must follow the methodology memorandum, and the ACER document must include the standard public notice statement, which is available in the PD&E and ETDM manuals. This statement is automatically included in the ETDM screening event. As Ted mentioned earlier about Pell, this statement, along with the entire ACE process, supports the adoption into the PD&E phase. When the alternative corridor evaluation report is prepared and ready, the ACER is submitted to the lead agency. Just a reminder that when we say lead agency, it's usually FDOT's Office of Environmental Management, since most ACE studies are conducted for projects that require a federal process for the PD&E phase, such as an environmental impact statement, or an environmental assessment. However, there could be times when the district is the lead agency. This is when the PD&E phase will be conducted following a state process for the PD&E phase, such as a state environmental impact report. In these cases, OEM should still be considered for assistance. After the lead agency reviews, the ACER is uploaded to the ETDM environmental screening tool for review by the ETAC and the public. This is one of the last steps in the ACE process. Once the review is finished and the ACER is updated as necessary, you'll proceed to the very last step, which is the step that probably everyone loves, the approval. Now that the ACE study is ready for approval, the lead agency approves the ACER and considers the results and recommendations for adoption into the PD&E phase. Some projects may have a cooperating agency, which may be identified after completing the ACE study, because you have an idea of what corridors are moving forward and what agency may be suited as a cooperating role. The cooperating agency must also approve the results and recommendations for adoption into the PD&E phase. But the great news is that they are already involved with the results and decisions as an ETAT member during the ACE process. Once the ACER is approved, the ETDM coordinator would republish the ETDM screening report with the ACER as an attachment. During the PD&E phase, the ACER must be included in the project file as supporting documentation. There are numerous benefits associated with the ACE process. The overarching intent of the ACE process is to minimize the number of alternatives that go into the full NEPA analysis, or the PD&E phase. This upfront planning effort involved in ACE may result in the elimination of corridors, some of which may address potential issue resolutions. The remaining alternatives may reduce the potential environmental impacts and even lower the class of action. The ACE process establishes a consistent statewide approach with enough flexibility to allow districts to tailor analysis methods and engagement efforts to the needs of the particular project. Early results and decisions adopted or incorporated by reference into the PD&E study help to shorten the overall project schedules, resulting in delivering transportation solutions to our communities in a shorter time frame.